welcome to the Thought Leader series by Quadrant Knowledge Solutions. In this series, we invite a lot of industry leaders, thought leaders, and technology influencers on talking about various leadership lessons and priorities, innovations, empowerment, and so many other things about emerging technology trends as well as the marketing trends. Right. So today with me, I'm pleased to invite Mr. David Hauser. David Hauser is amongst the most prominent thought leaders and industry experts in the supply chain management industry. As a truly global executive, David has led global operations from the United States, the UK, the China, and has mastered the complexities of conducting businesses in different countries and cultures. He excels at translating a global vision into the tactical steps needed to drive revenue and EBITDA growth, crafting the strategy and execution roadmap to be successful across multiple cultures, countries, and languages. In his recent role, he has led international sales and operations at Highjump, now which is a part of Corber Group as the Corber supply chain. David has played an integral role in transforming supply chain software company Highjump from a best of business solutions like a niche player into a global multi-billion euro conglomerate, right? Building out the company's global footprint and delivering sustainable growth across global regions from Latin America, APAC, and EMEA. Right. Prior to joining the high jump, he has also spent several years at Oracle and Infor as a sales leader within the business unit. So welcome to the Quadrant Knowledge Solutions the Thought Leadership Series, David. How are you?
Piyush, it's great to see you. I'm doing very well. Thank you. Coming to you today from the East Coast of the United States. It's good to be with you, sir. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks, David. Maybe for our audience, you may like to introduce yourself, right? Maybe we would like to learn more about you.
Sure, thanks. And one of the things that I want to really take away from today, Piyush, is giving the audience some nuggets, some real useful information. So as you said, I've run global sales and operations for Highjump, Kerber, Navis, others. So from the very top of the terminal operating system through the supply chain in the back end out through transportation. And as you said, I've done that mostly outside the United States within EMEA, Pan Latam, so Mexico down to Santiago de Chile, and all of Asia Pac, Australia, New Zealand, China, India, Southeast Asia, et cetera. So I think what I'll bring to this today is kind of a flavor and talk about the maturity curve of where I see new players, emergence, new technologies, and how that relates to the global supply chain and great opportunities that we have out there now. So great introduction, and thank you for that, sir.
Thank you so much, David, for this introduction. So, David, I have multiple questions. So, for example, there has been a huge disruptions in the supply chain all over the world, right? Due to various reasons like the global pandemic, the Ukraine-Russia war, the increasing cost, fuel prices, and material shortage, and so many others, right? So, what kind of challenges the global industry is facing currently in the supply chain? And do you see any opportunities coming out in this scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would add some other kind of geopolitical issues on there as well, potentially sanctions and such. So it has led to massive disruption. So I'll give you just one example again, as I said I would during this conversation, is the supply chain before COVID really was kind of a spoken hub concept. In the United States, we export many poultry items to Asia. And that happens on a 46-day basis. And 46 days after the pandemic started, guess what happened? We had a glut of poultry product that we couldn't ship overseas because of the transportation. The vessels weren't able to move. So it really has alerted the world to be more resilient and have more flexibility and visualness, if you will, into the supply chain to try and keep those things from happening in the future. So how are those things happening? We've seen a lot of entrance into cloud operations to be able to take these things from, the operations from perhaps your back office, put them in the cloud and be able to have some global visibility. You add into there some artificial intelligence and machine learning and such, and you really can have a much more predictive model moving forward. And so I think that this has created some tremendous opportunities where not only in your part of the world, where I say, the tiger and the dragon are both sticking up their heads and arguing over some things in a positive sense, but also places in Southeast Asia, the Malacca Straits and such, where there's more and more opportunity for vessels to get to the end user in a more efficient manner. So the disruptions are certainly real, and particularly over the last couple of years with the COVID situation and the lockdowns that's caused, I've seen some real emergence in resiliency. and flexibility and adaptability within the supply chain to make sure that we can get those raw materials from point A to point B in an efficient manner. If there's nothing that you and I are, other than professional colleagues and friends, is consumers, right? And so how we consume is different all over the world. And so there's technologies that have been put in place to really help make that a better scenario going forward. And so I think the whole COVID stuff has taught us a great lesson within the supply chain space itself globally, and I think we'll continue to see that going forward.
I think I absolutely agree with you, right? I think technology plays a really major role during this COVID time in bringing operational resiliency as well as leading this wave, right, of business growth in the uncertainty.
Right.
So great perspective, David. So David, you have a very huge experience in the global business management and leading international operations in key markets, right? So how do you see the global supply chain evolving in the last few years, right? What kind of changes that are anticipated in the next few years to come?
Yeah, and at the end of this, I'll wrap it up and talk about where kind of the guaranteed future is on some real specific growth items that I see. But when you talk about kind of opportunities, one of the things that I'm seeing is a reduction of applications. As from the supply chain space, in the past it was really about kind of, it was a laggard from the ERP system, so the Oracles, SAPs, and Infors of the world, right? And then it became kind of very much more important. So almost outside of the human resource, getting your supply chain right, I think, is the most important application perhaps in the stack, right? Financials, HR, manufacturing, those things are a little bit more mature. So I'm seeing some growth functionally within the supply chain space. Right, yesterday it used to be kind of about the warehouse, and now if you look at it from it's your right, my left, kind of advanced shipment notices coming in. So have a visibility of that and be able to move that if you can, because you have product on the water that could be used for customer B because customer A doesn't need that right away, as an example. So combining some applications, almost making them super apps, I think is something that we're seeing moving forward. So how does somebody like a Kerber or a Manhattan or somebody like that really add functional value to customers and allow them to reduce their applications and thus make things more simple? The other thing I'm really seeing significantly is really a move to OpEx. And that's really all around subscription, and it's all around cloud-based things. And as I say, when I speak around the world, it can be cloudy in Germany, but it can't be cloudy in France. Well, what does that mean, right? There's personal data and such that are still going through that. But at the end of the day, there's just a handful of super cloud providers that can both stand up an operation locally and be able to help from a redundancy perspective and a downage perspective around the world. And I'm continuing to see that as well. A great example of that is largest shoe manufacturer in the world happens to be in the UK. And when they get spikes on something, so they have both brick and mortar that they can use from an infrastructure perspective around the world, but yet the cross, or the precips, if you will, from their brick and mortar business to their supply chain online business is really pretty significant. So how do you handle those things, right? How do you become more flexible for less SKUs and perhaps you and I ordering 3 pairs of shoes when we know we really want one? And so how do you do that from a reverse logistics perspective, right? Huge opportunities out there. And I'm seeing more and more organizations that are moving and saying, hey, let's do this in an OpEx way, right? It allows us more time to value, getting the product and the services out there and being able to handle these things that can come in at any point in time. So instead of running a big batch and sending it to India, for example, right, you've got multiple orders coming in around the world, and how do you handle those? Much different scenario. So I think that you're seeing that from a move to OpEx, and then evolution. Getting on a more contemporary platform. The other thing I would say is some of the large organizations out there kind of are in a perpetual model, and they're lacking some of the things that the cloud native providers can provide for that. So you're also seeing some consolidation, right, in the industry of smaller players that may have a niche solution, point of sale, or transportation, and that's a really difficult one for the cost of petrol and how to really build out a TMS globally that works around the world. So you're seeing some entrance into the market, new players that are really kind of disrupting that. It's a great time to be in the supply chain space, and some of these smaller players are really starting to see some light here, in combination with some of the legacy larger players. So I hope that answers the question on kind of some challenges and some opportunities that I see out there moving forward.
In fact, David, I would like to share my own perspective on this one, right? I think this is really very interesting. So if you see, we are like a strategic global research and advisory company. We provide consulting and market research to variety of industry software domains, right? So we see
Hmm.
the adoption of cloud native technologies in other industry is much ahead than what the supply chain industry, or I would say
That's right.
manufacturing industry, is there, right? So yes, I totally agree with you. The OPEX model, the cloud native deployment is going to be there in the supply chain industry. As you said, it's a great time to be there in the supply chain industry. So thank you so much for sharing this perspective. I think my next question is related to this. What's your observation on the level of automation and digitalization in the supply chain, right? So, can you highlight some of the emerging trend in this area?
Yeah, this was really interesting to me, and sitting in the West right now, I would say that the West is laggards when it comes to this question overall. So automation and digitalization, and I guess let's start automation with you know simple things that have been out there like conveyor systems and Bombay sorters and that type of thing, kind of legacy technologies that have been out in helping kind of in the warehouse in the supply chain for quite some time. But what you're really starting to see, Piyush, now on the automation side is AGVs and AMRs. So we're getting into the robotic space. And where I say that this concept is particularly interesting, there's some futurists and economists out there that talk about how this is going to hit the global labor market. We're starting to see more and more sophistication of this. So instead of just an AGV in a track, you're starting to see those tracks replaced with GPS, and you're starting to see the GPS replaced with cameras. They're like eyes, right? So what is this enabling? It's enabling the warehouse or the supply chain, even if they're large um, uh, rubber motorized gantries that are really loading these vessels. They're starting to become autonomous. The automation level is starting to get much more intricate than it had been, and they're able to do things with automation that they couldn't in the past. And so I really wonder as we go forward how that's going to affect the labor market. There's just places, if you see in Asia, for example, you can go and get a cup of coffee and pay with your face, right? So that whole digitalization, the second part of automation, the whole digitalization part out there, and intelligence and machine learning on what time of the day and what are customers apt to want to do, they've replaced that person accepting cash with maybe somebody that's going to be informational for you. Say, hey, have you tried this coffee bean or this tea leaf from this part of the world? And why don't you sit down and enjoy a book while you're doing that? So it's gotten rid of, if you will, or significantly reduced a human piece of the supply chain and used it in a different way. So I suggest that we'll continue to see this. And I think it's going to be really around three areas, Piyush, that really need to come together: academia, government, and commercial, all coming together to support and give a way forward for industry to kind of mix and match that hybridness of more and more sophistication on the automation side of the house. That is, frankly, it started out, barely taking away some human jobs, and I see that really growing and maturing into, at some point in time, that cup of coffee or the tea that you're drinking is made by a machine, right? It's all robotics, and the people have been replaced with something that's more consistent, less costly. You don't have to worry about any geopolitical issues around the world or COVID crisis with the robot that's making the cup of coffee. So digital is certainly picking up, and you just can't keep up anymore, even as a small organization, on paper or on manual systems. You can't provide enough humans into the equation really to get the scale that you need. One more quick example: the largest shoe distribution company, not manufacturing, but distribution company, happens to be in China. So they're an ex-customer, very impressive. There's a reticulated arm in automation, right? Now you're starting to look almost like a humanistic arm that sticks a box and puts it inside of another box, slaps a label on it, puts it in China Post, for example, for delivery. They can literally turn the volume up when they have more orders coming in. It's very impressive to see this. So those kinds of things that we're seeing in the automation space continues to grow pretty significantly, and it becomes more intricate and more complex. The tasks that these machines used to be able to do is just growing up the food chain more and more and more. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in 4 or 5 years.
I think I totally agree once again, David. I think the autonomous mobile robots and other automation level of automation and digitalization you mentioned is really going to happen very fast, and that's what we are seeing also as part of the various research findings what we are doing. So in very interesting perspective, David. Thank you so much for sharing this perspective.
Sure.
And also, would you like to share your perspective on the ways in which the global companies consume, purchase, and negotiate for various software services and support within the technology and in the supply chain industry as a whole? I'm sure you have a lot of experience in this domain.
I have a ton of experience in this domain around the world with myself personally at the CXO level in teams out there that have been really prosecuting and executing the opportunity. And there's a big change on that. And you know, for some of the large legacy organizations out there, it's a much more difficult move. There's only a couple out there that are comfortable or successful with it. And here's what I mean by that. Right, I had mentioned earlier, Piyush, that it's really moving to an OpEx model. The other thing that we're starting to see is the driving down of maintenance and support. So that M&S cost used to be between 18 and 22%, depending on if the organization needed 5 days a week or they needed 7x24 support. So customers are really demanding in this OpEx model that the vendor or the partner needs to figure out how they're going to blend that in an opportunity that makes sense for the customer. And I would say another nugget to take out there is it's somewhere about 36 months from the time that you would buy a perpetual license to the time you should see that ROI back on an OpEx or a subscription model. Customers are also really demanding, I want to see value up front. You know, some of these monster legacy applications out there from some of the larger players in the world really never got to see an ROI, right? The implementation takes forever, it's years, and almost by the time you get there, you forgot why you started. And some of the things are implemented correctly and some of them aren't, and there's overruns and those kinds of things. So I'm seeing more customers biting off something that they can consume, proving value from the vendor. So instead of coming in and charging me X dollars or X rupees or X whatever the currency may be, come in here and prove your value. Take partnership to the next level. Let's see that this application and this solution does something very focused and very specific. And then maybe perhaps we share in the gains on that. So it really has turned the proposition upside down in a way to the end customer out there. And then if you go backwards through the supply chain into how do salespeople and such get compensated within these organizations, it's really an opportunity to look at them more in an annuity-based, if you will, compensation model, which forces in a good way the salesperson to be more focused on the customer, you know, not show up at the end of a quarter or something like that. But I think the software industry gets beat up on quite a bit, but to stay close to the customer, see it through, make sure it happens, add additional value as you consume and as the customer wants to add additional value for something. So make it more of a subscription model and look at it from kind of a menuing basis. It's pretty significant change throughout the industry. And I think it's where it is needed to be headed for quite a number of years. And I think it really increases that value. If you think for a minute, the conversation you and I are having, very straightforward, very simple. If you think, for example, you know, a telephone conversation, that's the way software needs to become. But the back-end infrastructure on that is wildly complex, right? You and I are speaking halfway around the world, just like we're sitting in the same room. And the back office on that, wildly complex on where those servers are being routed and what the best, you know, frequency is and where they can make that stuff happen. That's the way it needs to be. And that's the way it is able to be on this new subscription model. Let's take that complexity and let somebody do it that handles it better on the back end, have a really nice, clean, easy to use UI that handles what the customer is looking for. So massively different. And it's a topic that I get excited to talk about.
I completely agree. I think this is a very nice perspective, David, the way you mentioned, right? I think you are essentially trying to make vendors more customer centric, right? Rather than pushing sales towards making them partner, right? I think if they can prove their value, they can do better, like in terms of service to their customers. So great.
It's true. It's true. And even from a CRM perspective for companies that help the software vendors, there's wonderful organizations that are showing up that are being able to look at these kinds of things and help from an automation perspective. You know, salespeople tend to want to go out and be a little bit more tactical. So there's software that helps gather those data points and make sure that we're dripping properly to the customer and allowing us to work and partner with the customer at the right time, at the right price, when the customer feels it's ready and time to do that. Software packages that can consolidate email, voice, marketing campaigns, and go to market in a more, I think, more personal relationship. And I think that that's been needed. So I'm happy to see that trend, and good for the customers, right? Driving that. Our beloved customers can't live without them, and they're becoming smarter over the years, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's definitely going to happen in the future, right? I think when I speak to a lot of end users in this segment, I think they keep talking about vendors who are really helping them transform their operations, right? Rather
That's
than
that's right.
pushing the sales to really, they are very happy to work with vendors, and that's how the level of relationship these vendors are having with these innovations or technology-driven perspective, right?
Yeah, I think, just one quick example in that again is, you think about the word data warehouse, right? That's such a legacy term. We've been warehousing data for 40 years, but with cloud applications and more powerful servers, you can really take that data to actual useful information. And that wave of new employees aren't familiar with that 40-year-old technology, right? They want to be able to use things now, look forward, not in the rearview mirror, what could happen in the future, not what did happen in the past. And so the whole wave of new generation of worker is helping fuel that. So it's really taking it at a very fast pace. It was needed to happen, kind of stir up the software industry. It's good to see, really good to see.
Yes, and do you have any feedback from the customer side? Did you speak to some of the end users on that aspects?
Oh, for sure, and in a number of ways. We've done business there. I think of one particular customer in Taipei, in North Taipei, where one of the previous sales teams that I led came in and did just what I was talking about, highly automated. It was an e-commerce warehouse hub, if you will. So if things fit within certain box limits, it was almost a lights out operation. So from a picking area, AGVs would bring the product over. At that point in time, humans picked, put it onto the truck, and it went out for delivery. In the next couple of years, it'll be a lights out operation. We took this and said, all right, let's do a prototype. Let's do a mock-up of this. Let's take one of those AGV lanes and let's bring this over and prove out the scenario. We wound up winning that piece of business, or my team did, and other warehouses around Taiwan. And Taiwan's a very, import-centric organization. So being able to prove that out and partner, not just so that your customer's neck is on the line, if you will, instead of that, let's shake hands and let's become partners on this and prove out the technology. So that's another nugget kind of and an example. And I would say in that part of the world, the next question that we talk about and where I see in the future, I'll talk about how that will change to the next level here as well. So absolutely, you're seeing more and more and more of that. Prove it out, partner with me, and let's look at the model of not just sell me something, but let's partner on it and let's disrupt really kind of almost a legacy model for new technology and new operating systems and new ways to deploy that software. It's good stuff, it really is.
Great, great. So I'm sure you have shared a lot of thoughts about the future of supply chain, but let me still ask you a question, David. So if you want to conclude your final thought and perspective on the future of supply chain as industry, what would be those thoughts?
In this, Piyush, as we date this today in later May, I'd like to come back on this. Perhaps we'll send each other a note in 2 years or 3 years. I'm convinced. So, is again a nugget for the audience out there. I'll just simplify it and put it in ABC, and then I've got to add the D at the end, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So A really is all about automation, autonomous, and artificial. So when we talk about that organization in Taiwan that was nearly lights out, as they get reticulated arms to put the product in the boxes and then be able to send a robot out to load the truck properly, the lorry properly, autonomous vehicles is next on the list. We're doing a lot of that work here in the United States. There's organizations that are doing that around the world. It will save insurance costs. It'll save road jam. It will reduce petrol costs. So that autonomous vehicle piece, I see continuing to get more and more important, if you will, within the supply chain. And we talked about automation and then the artificial intelligence out there. Quick story on that one as well. Apparel organization in Europe that has cameras that you're unaware of. They're not taking your personal data, but they're looking at metadata. How long did you pick up this garment before you put it down? You know, how did your body react to it? And so fast fashion, for example, because of artificial intelligence, they already practically know what we want before we know what we want. So there's a whole AI component of this that's very, very fascinating. Right now, if we have an eye issue, we go to the doctor to figure that out. In the future, if you look at artificial intelligence to say, Piyush or David, you may have an eye issue in 5 years, and we know that because we've got 1 billion customers in the background that we've researched this on. So automation, autonomous, and artificial. B is big and bigger data, and we talked about that for a minute. So, you know, they call it data lakes right now. It's really, if you think about it, data oceans. There's huge pipes under the water that are getting this data into the countries in a faster and more efficient and economical way. So that data becomes something that's very, very useful and important for the customer to be able to use. C, I think, is cloud. If you're not in the cloud, you're not going to survive. This statement, and this what we're doing right now is on the cloud. All your banking stuff is, all your airlines, and you know, you can pay with cryptocurrency now in some places in Europe. You know, when you're in a taxi, and all of that is being churned in the cloud. There's a number of providers right now that allow that, and I'd almost call it data center or Web 2.0, if you will, springing up, you know, more secure, better data centers, less cost. It really is better for the customer in more cases than not to run on the cloud than to run in their own data centers. It's safer, it's more secure. And then I'll end this after the ABC with D, and this one's interesting. We talked about this with the newer workforce coming into the environment, is device agnostic. I'm receiving you today on a MacBook Pro, a new MacBook Pro. Not sure what you're receiving me on or what you're communicating to me on. It shouldn't matter. Right, and so you get into that as well as kind of this BYOD, is bring your own device to work. What is the limitations, and where do we get gray on those workers that might be doing something personally on the side on a social platform that actually helps the company? So D is device agnostic. It shouldn't matter. Again, the complexity out there is something that as software vendors we need to take care of, but provide it in a usable fashion, regardless of what device that you're using in running forward. So that's my nuggets on the ABCDs of where the supply chain industry and tech in general are headed, and what I am absolutely certain that you'll be seeing as a movement going forward.
Absolutely, David. I think that definitely these things are going to happen, and I would assure you that I will be definitely sharing a note from both the side, right? I'll be sharing some more insight with you on these directions, because when we do a lot of user research as well as the research with vendors, we see the same thing. I think
Sure.
analytics, data management, and this new analytics insights are going to play a bigger role in the future than what it is today.
Sure
So,
will.
so great. So great, David. I think thank you so much for sharing your insights and thought leadership. And I'm really appreciate for you too for your sharing your time, right? Spending some time for our thought leadership video series. So,
Well,
so
Piyush,
yeah,
Piyush, I want to thank you as well. Quadrant has always been an important analyst for me professionally. I gained from your insights. I learned from your wisdom and knowledge. And so it's quid pro quo for me, sir. I really appreciate the invitation and working with your organization. You guys do a great job.
great. Thank you so much, David. Thanks for your time, and thank you guys for stay tuned to this channel, right, for more thought leadership videos. And we are going to invite more industry thought leadership to share their insights and perspectives on the future market directions and technology trends. Thank you so much.
Bye for now.